Yeah, hi, this is Les Gold from American Jewelry. I have an employee theft. I just called the cops. They're on their way. Make sure he doesn't go in the back. Make sure he's available, and make sure he doesn't run out of the store.
For years, millions of viewers believed they knew exactly who Les Gold was. He was loud, explosive, and constantly fighting with his children inside one of the most chaotic pawn shops in America. On Hardcore Pawn, every day looked like a disaster waiting to happen. But once the cameras shut off, the real story looked very different. The family constantly screaming at each other on screen was, by most accounts, far more stable than viewers realized. And behind all of it was a side of Les Gold the audience never really saw.
What have we got?
A couple of antiques from the 1950s.
Okay.
They're from old diners. He dispensed the napkins, of course, and also fortune.
One built on decisions that rarely made it onto the show, including a purchase connected to one of the most disturbing names in modern American history. So, what were the decisions that defined the man behind the camera? And how much of what was shown was real? Join us as we break down how Les Gold lived a double life for 30 years, and no one ever suspected.
I'm here this morning with my good friend Les Gold, the famous pawnbroker from the show Hardcore Pawn, a guy that is known around the world and has become clearly the most famous guy in pawn. And Les, my first question for you today is, do you ever feel unsafe with all the exposure?
The man America thought it knew. When Hardcore Pawn premiered on True TV in July 2010, it became the most watched series premiere in the network's history. The show's premise was simple. Cameras follow Les Gold, his son Seth, and his daughter Ashley through their daily operations at American Jewelry and Loan, a pawn shop on the Detroit side of 8 Mile Road. But what made it watchable had nothing to do with the merchandise and everything to do with the family running the place. It was the chaos. Customers screaming across counters, Seth overriding his father's decisions the moment Les's back was turned, and Ashley inserting herself into every confrontation with the energy of someone who had been waiting years for a national audience. Les presided over it all with a combination of dramatic frustration and genuine authority that remained entertaining. The show built an entire identity around that dynamic, and audiences responded in numbers that surprised even the people who had made it. The show ran for 9 seasons and 227 episodes between 2009 and 2015, and throughout that entire run, it maintained a consistent image of the Gold family as a household that was on the verge of internal collapse. A father is constantly at war with his children, a business that lurched from crisis to crisis, a pawn shop where every transaction was a confrontation, and where every employee was one bad decision away from being escorted out in handcuffs. That image was the show, and the show was a highly selective version of the truth. Several former employees who worked at American Jewelry and Loan during the filming period have publicly spoken about what the shop was actually like when the cameras were not rolling. It was steady and professional, a business that had been operating successfully in one of America's most economically challenged cities for over 30 years before a television camera ever pointed at it. The Gold family, who fought constantly on screen, was, by all off-camera accounts, a tightly knit unit that presented a genuinely united front when the production crew had packed up and gone home. The business that looked perpetually on the brink of implosion was, by the numbers, quietly expanding. While the audience focused on just one version, the other was quietly building something that the cameras were never pointed at. So, what was actually happening at American Jewelry and Loan while Hardcore Pawn made the Gold family famous for appearing to be falling apart? The business the show never showed.
94 shows, it's a milestone, almost the milestone I'm looking for. I'm looking for show 100. We'll get it shortly.
The American Jewelry and Loan that appeared on Hardcore Pawn was set in a 50,000 square foot building on Greenfield Road in Detroit, a former bowling alley that Les had converted into one of the largest pawn shops in the world. The building processes approximately 1,000 customers per day and employs up to 200 people at its peak. Those numbers do not describe a business being run by a family in constant crisis. They described a sophisticated, large-scale retail and financial operation that requires real management, real systems, and real consistency to function at that scale without falling apart. Les Gold opened American Jewelry and Loan in 1978, 32 years before the show existed. He built it from a single location in the Green 8 Shopping Center in Oak Park, Michigan, into a Detroit institution across 3 decades of operation in a city that went through economic collapse, industrial decline, massive population exodus, and eventual partial recovery. The business survived all of it. Not because of reality television, but because Les Gold knew how to run it, and had known how to run it long before anyone outside Detroit had any idea who he was. By the time Hardcore Pawn ended in 2015, the business had already expanded to multiple locations. In 2021, Les opened new shops in Southgate and Lincoln Park in Wayne County, Michigan, continuing to expand the chain while his son, Seth, took on more operational responsibilities. The business that the show portrayed as a barely controlled daily emergency was, in reality, a quietly expanding enterprise that kept adding locations while everyone was busy watching the family argue. What made Les Gold effective as a businessman was something the show simultaneously displayed and hid. His real skill was not entertainment, like most people thought. What he was good at was reading people. His personal philosophy, laid out in his book, For What It's Worth, Business Wisdom from a Pawnbroker, is built on the premise that a pawn shop is a frontline economic institution. It serves people who cannot access traditional banking, who need money on a Tuesday and have something of value to trade for it, and understanding those people's situations quickly and accurately is the core competency of the entire business. Every deal he made across 50 years of pawnbroking was built on that foundation, not on the dramatic confrontations the show turned into its signature product. He told a story about making his first sale at the age of 7, behind the counter of his grandfather's shop, Sam's Loans, on Michigan Avenue in Detroit. He revealed that the feeling of completing that transaction, of matching a person's need with a solution and arriving at a number both sides could live with, was the feeling that determined the rest of his professional life. The show gave viewers the arguments. The arguments were real enough in their own way, but they were the surface layer on top of something that ran much deeper and had been running for 30 years before the cameras arrived. And the most revealing transaction of Les Gold's career, the one that captures his actual professional psychology more accurately than any episode of Hardcore Pawn, never made the main show at all, because it did not involve an argument, a confrontation, or a fired employee. It involved a vehicle, a deceased physician, and 17 years of quiet ownership that most people never knew about until a reporter started asking questions. So what exactly was the Dr. Death van? And why did Les Gold buy it? The Dr. Death van and what it says about who he really was. In 1997, 13 years before Hardcore Pawn existed, Les Gold walked into a scrapyard in Detroit and bought a 1968 Volkswagen minibus for $20,000. The van had belonged to Dr. Jack Kevorkian, the physician who became internationally known and deeply controversial for his involvement in the deaths of approximately 130 terminally ill patients who had sought his assistance in ending their lives. The van was where many of those deaths occurred. It had earned its informal name, the Deathmobile, in the press coverage that followed Kevorkian's arrest and trial. Les Gold bought the Deathmobile. He bought it without telling anyone outside his immediate circle. He kept it in his possession for 17 years. Then, in 2014, he sold it for a $25,000 profit. His explanation for eventually letting it go was that it took up too much room. That single transaction reveals more about Les Gold's real professional psychology than any episode of Hardcore Pawn ever managed to. He looked at an object that most people would refuse to touch, evaluated it purely in monetary terms, bought it at a price that made financial sense, held it until the right moment, and sold it for a profit. There was no drama or performance for an audience, just the clear-eyed calculation of someone who has spent 50 years understanding what things are actually worth versus what people believe they are worth, and who has never allowed the emotional weight that other people attach to objects to interfere with that assessment. The Deathmobile was never part of the show's main narrative. It existed in the parallel version of Les Gold's life, the one where he was simply a pawnbroker making decisions that most people would find genuinely difficult, quickly, and without ceremony. It is the kind of decision that reveals a specific kind of detachment from sentiment that is both useful and unusual. And it is the defining characteristic of someone who can sit across from a grieving person trying to sell their grandmother's ring and tell them accurately and honestly what it is worth without confusing the price with the memory. That quality ran through everything he built. It is also what the show reduced to a television character. So, when the cameras were rolling and Hardcore Pawn was being made, what was actually real and what was constructed for the audience? What the show was actually built on? The question that followed Hardcore Pawn from its very first season is the one that eventually follows every reality show. How much of it was real? And the answer, in this specific case, is more layered than either side of the argument wants to acknowledge. A former employee who went public on TikTok in 2023 was specific about what was genuine and what was not. The negotiations, the employee theft, and the customers were real. Any transaction involving the buying and selling of items was a genuine financial exchange. He said the crew filmed every day from open to close for 3 to 4 weeks at a stretch, which generated far more footage than ever made it to air. What ended up on screen was the most dramatic fraction of what was actually recorded on any given day. The storylines, however, were shaped by production. Some situations were created specifically for television by producers who understood that a show about a pawn shop lives or dies on conflict, and that a quiet professional day at a well-run business does not generate the kind of tension that keeps viewers coming back the following week. Some episodes appear to have been significantly dramatized, though the Gold family has never formally acknowledged specific instances of staging. What they have consistently said is that the cameras captured what actually happened. What the show did to the real Les Gold was take one genuine characteristic, his directness, amplify it to its most theatrical extreme, and strip away everything surrounding it that gave it meaning. The man on screen was a character. The man in the building was an employer of 200 people in one of America's most economically distressed major cities, operating a business that had survived 3 decades of conditions that had closed most of the other enterprises around it. In 2012, he helped the United States Secret Service catch a counterfeiter when a man named Kenny Smith tried to sell him counterfeit currency and a counterfeiting machine at the shop. Gold cooperated with federal agents, and Kenny was arrested. That story made for a solid episode, but what it reveals, more importantly, is a man with a specific moral framework operating underneath the television persona. Someone who understood the shop's position in the community clearly enough to know that cooperating with federal law enforcement on counterfeiting was not a complicated decision. and someone whose 30 years in that building had given him a clear sense of what his responsibilities were to the city around him. None of that came through in the arguments about whether Seth had made the right call on a used motorcycle, but it was there the whole time, running quietly alongside everything the cameras were pointed at. The life that was running alongside all of it. For 30 years, from 1978 until the show launched in 2009, Les Gold ran a pawn shop in Detroit without anyone outside the city knowing his name. That is the version of his life that the television show had no access to, because it happened before the cameras arrived. It is also the version that explains everything the cameras eventually found. He married Lily Gold in 1975, 3 years before opening American Jewelry and Loan. She was there from the beginning, through the early years in Oak Park, through the 1993 move into the former bowling alley on Greenfield Road, and through the growth from a single location to a Detroit institution. The marriage that the show occasionally placed in the background had been the stable center of the entire operation for decades before a production company came looking for drama. His grandfather had owned Sam's Loans on Michigan Avenue. Even though the shop is now closed, Les still visited it during one of Hardcore Pawn's most genuinely moving moments, standing in front of the shuttered building where he had made his first sale at 7 years old and telling the story of a robbery at gunpoint that had happened there in the years before he was born. Pawnbroking was never a career he chose in the way most people choose careers. It was an inheritance, a specific relationship with commerce and community that had been passed through 3 generations of his family before a true TV producer ever walked through the door on Greenfield Road. In 1998, a producer named Richard Dominic saw one of American Jewelry and Loan's local television commercials during a break in another show and thought he had found the basis for a reality series. He approached the Gold family. The show that eventually went into production more than a decade later was built on the foundation of a business that had already been functioning without anyone's attention for 30 years before that commercial ever aired. The discovery was the audiences. The business had always been there. What the show brought was visibility for something that had been invisible simply because no one had thought to look. The 30-year runway before the cameras, the version of Les Gold that built the business and developed the philosophy and raised the children who eventually argued on screen with him, is the double life that nobody saw. Not because he was hiding it, because nobody was watching yet. But Hardcore Pawn wasn't the only show airing at the time. What made it stand out? What the show got right and what it buried. The most honest assessment of what Hardcore Pawn actually captured requires holding 2 things at once. The show got something real. It also buried something larger. His TED Talk, available through his official website and YouTube channel, shows a version of the same directness the show built its franchise around, but aimed not at haggling over a piece of jewelry in front of cameras, but at explaining what pawn shops actually are, the role they play in communities that have no access to conventional financial institutions, and the specific moral weight that comes with being the lender of last resort for people who have nowhere else to go. That is not just a television character. That is a man who has been thinking seriously about the same questions for 50 years and has arrived at answers that are worth hearing. His book, which Good Morning America anchor Josh Elliott called essential reading for anyone trying to build success in any business, is built on the same foundation as the show's entertainment value, but takes it in an entirely different direction. Where the show uses his directness as a source of conflict and comedy, the book uses it as a framework for understanding how commerce actually works on the ground. After the show ended, Seth became the primary public face of the operation, posting regularly from the shop and occasionally bringing Les back for content that revisits Hardcore Pawn moments for a new audience. with the show available in reruns and on streaming platforms. The father, who had final authority over every argument on screen, has stepped back in the years since the cameras left, letting his son build the next chapter of a business that 3 generations of the Gold family have put their lives into. The double life was never secret. It was invisible to everyone watching the show because the show was designed to make the arguments visible and leave everything else out of frame. What was out of frame was a 3rd-generation pawnbroker who built one of the most recognizable businesses in Detroit's modern history, kept 200 people employed across multiple economic downturns, bought the Deathmobile, and kept it for 17 years, because that is what made financial sense. Helped catch a federal counterfeiter, made his first sale at 7 years old behind his grandfather's counter, and married a woman in 1975 who has been beside the entire operation ever since. That is the Les Gold the show was always pointing at, but never quite reached. And it was running the whole time, right behind the camera, out of frame, doing the actual work. What does it say about the pawn business? The place where people bring what they value most when everything else has run out? That the man who ran it for 50 years turned out to be far more interesting than the show built around him ever managed to capture? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.